Hello, everybody. Let us begin with the analysis of the CAT 2022 paper, Slot 2. So just about a couple of days back, we dealt with Slot 1 of the 2022, and needless to say, it was tricky. Maybe the passages were easy, but then again, the questions were definitely tricky and difficult. So to be able to make sure that we do a good job today, let's give it an attempt and see what does the slot 2 have in store for us. We're going to begin with doing the reading comprehensions first, and then eventually getting onto the questions, seeing why an option, why not, and in that speed and in that pace is how we're going to be finishing up the entire of the slot 2. So I hope all of you guys are geared up already, and with that, let us begin. Octopuses are misfits in their own extended family. So, the passage begins by saying that they're a misfit. They belong to the mollusca class Cephalopoda, but they don't look like their cousins at all. So there is a stark, there's a stark difference between how they look and how everybody else in the family looks. Other mollusks include sea snails, sea slugs, bivalves or bivalves. Most are shelled invertebrates with a dorsal foot. So if you see why there is a difference is because they belong to the category of the mollusks, but they're very different from their other siblings, be it the snails, be it the sea slugs, be it the bivalves, which are mostly shelled invertebrates. So they have a shell and that they don't have a backbone, and that they have a very dorsal foot. Cephalopods are all arms and can be as tiny as 1 centimeters and as large as 30 feet. So they're of course belonging to the class that is called the cephalopods, and the cephalopods can be anywhere between 1 centimeter to 30 feet, and they are all arms. Some of them have brains the size of a walnut, which is large for an invertebrate, and a lot of them tend to be having brains which is the size of a walnut, which is actually very big, understanding that they are invertebrates. It makes sense for these mollusks to have added protection in the form of a higher cognition. They don't have a shell covering them, and pretty much everything feeds on cephalopods, including humans. Now, it goes about by saying that it makes a lot of sense for these mollusks to have an added protection in the form of a higher cognition, right? The reason why they're very smart, they're so intellectually, they're intellectually smarter than the other ones. It makes sense because they don't have a shell covering them, right? They don't have anything that covers them, and pretty much everything feeds. They're being fed by everyone, including the humans. But how did the cephalopods manage to secure their own invisibility cloak? But how is it that they turned out to be so smart and that they are being able to evade any sort of catching? Cephalopods fire from multiple cylinders to achieve this in varying degrees from species to species, and they tend to fire from multiple cylinders over here. Of course, this is metaphorical in the sense that there are a lot of ways, it varies from species to species to how exactly do they make themselves so smartly invisible. There are 4 main catalysts: chromatophores, iridophores, papillae, and leucophores. So there are basically 4 catalysts, and these are, so catalysts are what is going to, give you the kind of, the status quo that you want. So they happen to be the chromatophores, the iridophores, the papillae, and the leucophores is how it's been talked about. It then says, chromatophores are organs on their bodies that contain pigment sacs, which have red, yellow, and brown pigment granules. So these are basically the pigment sacs, which is why they come from the word chroma. Chroma in itself is a root word which means color. These sacs have a network of radial muscles, meaning muscles arranged in a circle radiating outwards. So they have radial muscles which are radiating outwards. These are connected to the brain by a nerve. There is a nerve that connects. When the cephalopod wants to change color, the brain carries an electrical impulse through the nerve of the muscle that expand outwards, pulling open the sacs to display the color on the skin. So it's like an electrical circuit that goes up and tells the brain this is what we want. Why these 3 colors? Because these are the colors the light reflect at the depth they live in. The rest is absorbed before it reaches those depths. So these are the only three colors that can be reflected, understanding how deep in the sea or the ocean they lie. Well, what about other colors? Q, the iridophorus. Think of the second level of skin that has a thin stack of cells. These can reflect the light back at different wavelengths. It's using the same properties that we have seen in hologram stickers and rainbows on puddles of oil. You move your head and you see a different color. The sticker isn't doing anything but reflecting light. It's your movement that's changing the appearance of the color. This property of holograms, oil, and other surface is what is called iridescence. So again, iridescence or iridophores basically becomes the second level of the skin. And now these are going to have very thin stacks of cells. And these are going to again reflect light back of different wavelengths. So they carry the same phenomena, which is iridescence, and that is, it's based on the principle of, how holograms also tend to reflect and emit the light. Papillae are sections of the skin that can be deformed to make a texture bumpy. So now then comes the papillae. Now these are sections of the skin that can be deformed. Even humans possess them, which we call the goosebumps, but cannot use them in a manner that cephalopods can. So the way these guys can, it's of course something that we can't use it in. For instance, the use of these cells is how an octopus can wrap itself over a rock and appear jagged, or how a squid or a cuttlefish can imitate the look of a coral reef by growing miniature towers on their skin. So these are how they tend to enable themselves with these wonderful, marvelous things. It actually makes the texture of the substrate it chooses. So it actually matches the texture of whichever be the kind of substance that it's trying to choose. Finally, we have the leucophores, which according to a paper published in Nature, cuttlefish and octopuses possess an additional type of reflector cell, which is actually called the leucophore. Now, what are these? These are cells that scatter full spectrum light so that they appear white in a similar way that a polar bear's fur appears white. So these are something which are very specific to probably the cuttlefish and the octopuses and how they emit the white light. Leucophores. Now, leuco in itself is white, which is why leukemia becomes the cancer for white blood cells. So that's how it is. So leucophores will also reflect any filtered light shown on them. If the water appears blue at a certain depth, the octopuses and the cuttlefish can appear blue. If the water appears green, they can appear green, so on and so forth. So this is what helps them reflect any filtered light which is shown on them, which is why if the color of the water is blue, so are they. If it is green, so are they. So essentially, that is what the passage talks about. Talks about the four, distinct features of the cephalopods, and especially how the octopuses and the cuttlefish tend to have the fourth layer, which is over and above the rest of them, and how this helps them emit the light, make sure that they're able to scavenge for themselves and also evade from the predators that we have. So that is what the passage is about. And with that, let's get on to the questions. But the first one says, based on the passage, we can infer that all of the following statements, if true, would weaken the camouflaging adeptness of the cephalopods, except. Okay, now that's pretty complicated here. So we will first have to understand what does it want us to do. Now, the moment I say based on the passage, so it has to be based on the passage, we can infer that all of the following statements, if true, so if all of these be true, they would weaken the camouflaging adeptness. Adeptness means the skill. So of course, the cephalopods, that is the octopus, they have this tendency wherein they are able to camouflage themselves. That is, they're able to hide themselves to be able to save themselves from the predators. Now all of these are going to weaken, which means there are going to be these three options wherein it is going to say that they will not be able to do this camouflage, except. So we have to find that one option which is going to tell us that yes, it is going to help them camouflage. So three of these will tell us no, one of it will tell us yes, and we have to simply find the one that is yes. I hope everybody understands the question here. Right? There was a lot of breaking down of information that we had to do. We'll do it one more time just so that you understand. So we can infer all of the following, if true, would weaken the camouflage. So weaken means, of course, you have to reverse it. Now in the passage, of course, the cephalopods have been exceptional in their ways wherein they can camouflage, they can keep changing because of the kind of reflections their skin allows. Then you have to weaken, which means that there is no reflection, the fact that they can't camouflage, the fact that they can't save them because of, being able to match with, being able to be like those water chameleons. Except. So except means what is that one which is going to say that yes, they can camouflage, right? So three are going to be a no, one is going to be a yes. We simply have to find the one which is now going to be a yes for us. Let's start with the first one. The number of chromatophores in cephalopods is half the number of iridophores and leucophores. So the total number of chromatophores that is there in the cephalopod is half the number of iridophores and leucophores. So half of it is the iridophore and half of them is the leucophore. So clearly the leucophore allows the white and the iridophore allows them to, do the hologram idea, which means if it is a combination of both, clearly they're going to be able to camouflage very easily. Well, that makes sense. This is definitely true. So this is likely to be an answer. Let's reserve this. The temperature of the water at the depth at which cephalopods reside render the transmission of the neural signs difficult. If it is difficult, the fact that they cannot camouflage. We wanted the one with an except, so this can't be an answer. The hydrostatic pressure at the depth at which cephalopods reside render radial muscle movement difficult. That is, any sort of reflection that they're doing is difficult. That means they cannot camouflage, which means this is not going to be an answer either. Light reflects the colors red, green, and yellow at the depths at which cephalopods reside, which means they cannot camouflage into any other color but this, which also goes to say that they will not be able to, they'll not be able to camouflage. Again, not an answer, because all of these, while say that it's going to weaken the camouflage, our question was alongside except. So the one thing that tells us that yes, they can be camouflaging becomes option A. I hope everybody understands the question here and also the requirement that we had. Let's get on to the next one. Question number 2. All of the following are reasons for octopuses being misfits except that they. So all of these are reasons except. So give me the one reason why they are not a misfit. That means they seem to be a perfect fit, but the other options of course are going to be clearly going to be reasons as to why they are rightly called the misfits. So we have to find the one wherein they are no more a misfit. Okay, now let's see. Exhibit higher intelligence than other mollusks. Obviously they're a misfit. Then why should they be called a cephalopod, or why should they be clubbed in the same category? So this is not an answer. This is definitely a reason why they are a misfit. Are consumed by humans and other animals. Now this is a commonality of the octopus with the other ones. So definitely this becomes a reason as to why they are not a misfit. Do not possess an outer protective shell. Yes, because while all of them do have, a protective coating, these guys don't. So this is the reason why they have, they are a misfit. Have several arms. Well, that is also a reason why they are a misfit. So the one answer as to why they are rightly, or why is it that they are not to be called a misfit, is clearly because they are consumed by humans and other animals, just as the other cephalopods are. So the correct answer over here is going to be option B. Again, I hope this one's absolutely clear. Let's get to question number 3 here. Which one of the following statement is not true about the camouflaging ability of the cephalopods? Okay, this is a specific detailed question. So which of the following is not true? True, false karke nikal lete, right? Something that is not true is going to be the one that is false. Cephalopods can change their texture. This is true. Cephalopods can change their color. This is true. Cephalopods can take the color of their predator. Clearly false. This is not said in the passage at all. Cephalopods can blend into the color of the surroundings. True. I think there's only one information which is false, which makes the correct answer being option C. And the last one for this passage. Based on the passage, it can be inferred that the camouflaging technique in an octopus are most dissimilar. They are the most dissimilar to which one? We're not talking about the one that is going to be similar. We want to talk about the one that is going to be the most dissimilar. Let's see. Polar bears, well, the last paragraph used the whiteness of it, which was an analogy. This is correct. This is similar. This can't be an answer. Cuttlefish was used quite, hand in glove with the idea of the octopuses. This is also true. Sea snails, well, squids also happen to be one of those. So this is true, which means the correct answer is going to be C. So this camouflaging technique in an octopus are most dissimilar from that of a sea snail. While all of the others can do it, the one thing that is not going to be, I think in the initial paragraph itself, this is how they were a misfit, is how we understood, which is why the correct answer is going to be option C. I hope this one was absolutely clear. And with that, let's move on to the next passage. Now, again, from 5 to 8, we have a passage below that is accompanied by a set of questions. We have to choose the best answer. Let's go. When we teach engineering problems now, we ask students to come up to a single best solution defined by technical ideals like low cost, speed to build, and ability to scale. So whenever engineering problems are now taught, the students are also told to come up with this best definition solution, which is going to be low cost, speed enriched, and of course the ability to be able to scale. This way of teaching primes students to believe that their decision making is purely objective, as it is grounded in math and science. So this mannerism of teaching encourages them more so. Why? Because they feel that their decision making is purely factual, it is purely objective, and that it is surrounded by the maths and the science. So there's a lot of rationality that's coming in. This is also known as technical social dualism, the idea that the technical and the social dimensions of engineering problems are readily separable and remain distinct throughout the problem definition and solution process. Now, this entire feat is basically called a technical social dualism. It is the kind of an idea wherein the technical and the social dimensions of engineering problems are readily separable. They can be separated and remain distinct throughout the problem solving definition and solution process, and that they remain so. So there's clarity of what you're doing and why you're doing. Non-technical parameters such as access to the technology, cultural relevancy, and potential harms are deemed political and invalid in this way of learning. So all of the non-technical parameters that one has, the cultural aspect, the potential harms, they're deemed political and they're invalid in the way of teaching. But those technical ideals are at their core social and political choices determined by the dominant culture focused on economic growth for the most privileged segment of the society. But those technical ideals that are there are actually at the core of the social and the political choices. So they are very important to be understood. Why? Because they are determined by the dominant culture, which is going to focus on the economic growth for the most privileged segment. By choosing to downplay public welfare as a critical parameter for engineering design, we risk creating a culture of disengagement for societal concerns amongst engineers that is antithetical to the ethical code of engineering. Because if they don't pay attention to the society, then they're going to detach from the society, they're going to make something which is not going to connect with the audience altogether, and that is going to downplay the role of engineering altogether. Now, in my field of medical devices, ignoring social dimension has real consequences. So the author goes about by saying that in his field, it has some real consequences. Most FDA approved drugs are incorrectly dosed for people assigned female at birth, leading to unexpected adverse reactions. So most of the FDA approved drugs, they're actually incorrectly dosed for people assigned female at birth. So it's like you can't really be giving it to them. And that is why there are these adverse reactions that happen. This is because, now why does this happen? Because they have inadequately represented in clinical trials. So while the clinical trials are happening, people are not, they're not very well versed with what needs to be administered to whom. Beyond physical failings, subjective beliefs treated as facts by those in decision-making roles can encode social inequities. So beyond all these physical, failings that are going to happen, there are a lot of subjective beliefs also, which are treated as facts. For example, spirometers, routinely used devices that measure lung capacity, still have correction factors that automatically assume smaller lung capacity in Black and Asian individuals. So for example, if you see the spirometers, which is actually used to measure the lung capacity, now they still have correction factors. There are still a lot of correction that needs to be done. And why? Because they automatically assume that the Black and the Asian individuals have a smaller lung capacity. But these radically based adjustments are derived from research done by eugenists who thought these radical differences were biologically determined and who considered non-white people as inferior. Now, the reason why they have, the machines are trained like that is because it's been done by these people who feel that, of course, the non-whites are inferior. Secondly, they have let their racial differences be biologically determined. Now, these machines ignore the influence of social and environmental factors. So these simply ignore all of the other things that can also impact the lung capacity. Many technologies for systematically marginalized people have not been built because they were not deemed important, such as better early diagnostic and treatment of diseases like endometriosis, a disease that afflicts 10% of the people with uteruses. So many technologies have also systematically marginalized people. So they're like, okay, this is not built for you, this is probably built for you. That's how it is. For example, they have talked about the endometriosis, and we hardly question whether devices are built sustainably, which has led to a crisis in medical waste and healthcare, accounting for 10% of the US greenhouse emission, which has actually had very raging results so far. So until now, we're just trying to say that whenever there's a technology that does not address the culture and the society at large, there are repercussions. Social justice must be made core to the way engineers are trained. So, which is why social justice is very important. Some universities are working on this. Engineers taught this way will be prepared to think critically about what problems we choose to solve, how we should do responsibly, and how we build teams that challenge our way of thinking. Individual engineering professors are also working to embed societal needs in their pedagogy. So they are the individual engineer professors also who are trying to do this, merging. Darshan Karwat at the University of Arizona developed activist engineering to challenge engineers to acknowledge their full moral and social responsibility through practical self-reflection. So we have Darshan who actually tried to, he started with what you call the activist engineering, wherein when you are maybe doing some sort of innovation, you will have to make sure that the kind of repercussion or the kind of social responsibility that your innovation carries. Khalid Kadir at the University of California, Berkeley created a popular course engineering environment and society which teaches engineers how to engage in place-based knowledge and understanding of the people, context, and history to design better technical approaches in collaboration with community. So even Kadir went about by saying that there has to be a build-up that has to be done in sync with the community requirements. When we design and build with equity and justice in mind, we craft better solutions that respond to the complexities of entrenched systematic problems. And this is the way we can probably deal with the entrenched systematic issues more conveniently. So that is what the passage is about. And with that, let's get to the questions. On to question number 5. It says, in this passage, the author is making a claim that. So what is the opinion of the author? The objective of best solutions in engineering has shifted the focus of pedagogy from humanism and social obligation to technological perfection. It is the opposite. It's from technology to humanism, not the other way around. A can't be an answer. Engineering students today are taught to focus on objective technical outcomes independent of the social dimension of their work. Yes. Well, the question is asking, is making a claim that. So what is the one thing which he further goes to support? So yes, this has been the bone of contention in the passage. Let's reserve this. Engineering students are trained today to be non-subjective in their reasoning as this best enables them to develop the much needed. No, that's not what it is. They have to have that subjective element. They have to understand the society at large. Technical social dualism has emerged as a technique for engineering students to incorporate social consideration into their practical technical problem solving process. Now, while of course there is this technical social dualism that has come to play as per the passage, but that's not a claim made by the passage. A claim means what is the contention? What is the one thing that seems to be itching in the passage? So this is more of a problem solving. We want the problem is what the question is. So the one thing that the passage has contested around which the idea is going to be B and not D. I hope everybody understands the requirement of the question that we have. Okay, let's get to question number 6. All of the following are examples of a negative outcome of focusing on technical ideals in the medical sphere except. So all of these are negative outcomes, right? In the when you focus on the technical ideals except. So give me the one option that is a positive aspect. That is what it says. Exclusion of non-privileged group in tech clinical trials, which leads to incorrect drug dosage. Well, this is happening. This is, of course, a negative outcome. Now we want to talk about except, which means which of the following is now going to be an example of a positive outcome. That's what it is. So this is a negative outcome. This can't be my answer. Neglect the research and development of medical technologies for the diagnosis and treatment of diseases that typically afflict marginalized. This is also a negative outcome. This is happening. So of course, this can't be an answer. Incorrect assignment of people as female at birth, which has resulted in faulty drug intervention. Now, this is a positive outcome in the sense that we have now been able to identify that yes, there was an incorrect assignment of people, which means now this can be corrected. So now this is a positive outcome, that it was able to find out that this has been incorrect. This is how we've only been able to chase a certain number of people, while of course there should have been more, or this is the kind of gender this was being focused on. So this is definitely a true, this is a good outcome. I mean, we found out the fault. So that is what we want. So C is definitely an answer for us. Continuing calibration of medical devices based on past racial bases that have remained unadjusted for changes. But this is also a negative outcome of the, the medical sphere. So this also can't be an answer. Our answer is going to be option C. I hope everybody understands what is it. Now, I know this is an incorrect assignment, but isn't that what we want to correct? So if your trial is telling us that this was an incorrect assignment of people, that is the number of people and the allotment that was being done was incorrect, which means it is telling you that you need to do it better. So it becomes a positive outcome, is it not? And that is how it needs to be done. So a very smart way of putting out the options. Very well done, Cat, over there. Let's get on to the next question. Question number 7. The author gives all of the following reasons for why marginalized people are systematically discriminated against the technology re-interventions except. So 3 of these are reasons why the marginalized people are systematically discriminated. One is not. One is not a reason as to why there is a systematic discrimination. So we'll have to see which of the following are and which is that one option which is not. Let's start. And we hardly question whether devices were built sustainably, which has led to a crisis of medical waste and healthcare accounting for 10% of the US greenhouse emission. Now, this is talking about everybody, not just the marginalized people. So this can definitely be an answer for us. But let's see if the other ones are catering to the marginalized people. But those technical ideals are at their core social and political choice determined by the dominant culture forced on economic growth for most privileged segment. If this is done by the most privileged segment, the one who are at the receiving end, of course, are marginalized people. Clearly, this is definitely one of the reasons of systematic discrimination. Can't be my answer. These racially based adjustments are derived from research done by eugenists who thought these racial differences were biologically determined, and now the non-white people are inferior, which means this is also marginalization. They feel that only their white skin is supreme. Systematic discrimination. Beyond physical failings, subjective beliefs treated as facts by those in decision-making roles can encode social inequities. It is something that we will be able to find the moment we have the subjective angle to the scenario, but currently that is not something that is happening, and which is why we are not able to encode the social inequalities. The social inequalities mean the systematic discrimination of the marginalized people, which renders A to be the correct answer. I hope everybody is understanding how exactly are we going with it. And let's get to the next question. We can infer that the author would approve of a more evolved engineering pedagogy that includes all of the following except. So now the question over here is simply trying to be asking me that it can be inferred. The one thing that we can understand, that the author would approve of a more evolved engineering. So he says that yes, we need a more evolved pedagogy that includes all of the following except. So there's one option that should not be included in it, but the other ones should be. Making considerations of environmental sustainability intrinsic to the development. Of course, this was out loud. This has to be an involvement. This has to be something which has to be in the pedagogy. So this is not an answer, because I want the one thing he does not want. Design that is based on the needs of the community using local knowledge. Yes, this was also an inclusion. Not my answer then. A more responsible approach to technical design and problem solving than a focus on speed in developing and bringing to scale. Definitely, this was also something that he wanted to be included. So not my answer, which means I think by elimination we have the answer. Moving towards technical social dualism, where social community needs are incorporated in problem definition and solution. No. That's not what he wanted in terms of the pedagogy, while this was actually one of the one of the ways in which they started off. This was a pitch that was given, but this was not something that he wanted should be a part of the pedagogy altogether, which makes D the correct answer for us. I hope this passage was absolutely clear, and with that, let's move on to the next passage, starting from question number 6 to 12. And with that, let's move on to the next passage, starting from 9 to 12. Again, a passage with a set of questions, and we have to see which of the following is likely to be the correct answer. Let's start. Humans today make music. Think beyond all the qualifications that might trail after this bold statement, that only certain humans make music, that extensive training is involved, that many societies distinguish musical specialists from non musicians, that in today's society most listen to music rather than making it, and so forth. So, the moment you say humans today make music, I think that's going to be a stretch, that's going to be an overarch. Why? Because it says think beyond all the qualifications that might trail after this bold, after this very bold statement. So they're like, what are going to be the qualifications, because there are only certain humans who actually make the music. A lot of training is involved. Then there are so many societies that tend to distinguish musical specialists with the non-musicians, and that today most of the society listens to it rather than making. So there are a lot of categorizations one can understand. These qualifications, whatever their local merit, are moot in the face of the overarching truth that making music, considered from a cognitive and psychological vantage, is the province of all those who perceive and experience what is made. So they go about by saying that these qualifications that are there, whatever their local merit, so whatever be the nice thing that comes along with it, are moot in the face of, are something that are debatable in the face of this overarching truth that making music, considered from a cognitive and psychological vantage, so yes, making music is a very important thing, is the province of all those who perceive and experience what is made. So they are only the kind of, I mean, they can only be made by the kind of people who experience this entire journey. We are, almost all of us, musicians. Everyone who can entertain, not necessarily dance to a beat, who can recognize a repeated tune, not necessarily sing it, who can distinguish one instrument or one singing voice from another. So we are all, in some way or the other, musicians. It will often, I will often use an antique word, recently revived, to name this broader musical experience. Humans are musicking creatures. So he wants to, I mean, the author wants to use this tag, which was initially used, not anymore, but as it is rightly said, humans are musicking creatures. The set of capacities that enable musicking is a principal marker of modern humanity. There is nothing polemical in this assertion except a certain insistence, which will figure often in what follows, that musicking be included in our thinking about fundamental human commonalities. So then further goes about by saying that there are a set of capabilities that enable this entire principal marker, right? And that there is nothing more polemical. Polemical basically means to be very acerbic, to be very critical about something. So there's nothing more polemical in this assertion except a certain insistence. So nothing is wrong except for this one certain insistence, and that be which will figure often in what follows, what musicking should be included, how it should be included in our thinking about the fundamental commonalities. Capacities involved in musicking are many and take shape in complicated ways, arising from innate disposition. Innate disposition means the kind of understanding that you genetically possess. Most of these capacities overlap with non-musical ones, though a few may be distinct and dedicated to musical perceptions and production. In the area of overlap, linguistic capacities seem to be particularly important, and humans are in principle language makers in addition to music makers, speaking creatures as well as musicking ones. So there's also the angle of language that is actually coming. Humans are symbol makers too, a feature tightly bound up with language and not so tightly with English, to which they go about by saying that they're symbol makers too, something that resonates more towards the language side. The species Cassirer, dubbed Homo symbolicus, cannot help but tangle musicking in webs of symbolic thought and expression, habitually making it a component of behavioral complexes that form such expressions. But in fundamental features, musicking is neither language-like nor symbol-like, and from these differences come many cue to the ancient emergence. So all of this has only been done to be able to express the idea that musicking is neither language-like nor symbol-like. If musicking is primary shared trait of modern human, then to describe its emergence must be to detail the coalescing of that modernity. Coalesce basically means to be able to bring together. So if it is that primary, if it is a shared human trait, then to describe its emergence must be to detail the coalescing of that of modernity. So to understand how exactly has it come through. This took place, archaeologists are clear, over a very long duration, at least 50,000 years or so, more likely something closer to 200,000, depending in part on what that coalescence is taken to comprise. So if it can actually date back to anywhere between 50,000 years or so, more likely it's just something that's going to be closer to 200,000 years. If we look back 20,000 years, a small portion of this long period, we reach the lives of the humans whose musical capacities were probably little different from our own. So, cut to 20,000 years back, you're going to find that their disposition of music was different from ours. But as we look farther back, as we look farther back, we reach horizons where this similarity can no longer hold, perhaps 40,000 years ago. But if you jump to 40,000 years ago, you're going to see that it's pretty different from what it is. Perhaps 70,000, perhaps 100,000. But we never cross a line before which all the cognitive capacities recruited in modern musicking abruptly disappear. But never has it come to a point wherein nobody had these traits of musicking, unless we embrace the incredible notion that music sprang forth in full-blown glory. Its emergence will have to be tracked in gradualist terms across a long period. And unless we are actually able to embrace this incredible notion that music sprang forth in full-blown glory, that it's always been there, I think we will never be able to, come to terms and be respectful about the kind of legacy that music has had. This is one general feature of a history of music's emergence. This is just one feature. The history was at once socio-cultural and biological. The capacities recruited in musicking are so many. So describing its emergence involves following several or many separate strands, and which is why if you really want to, get the entire emergence of it, it is going to have a lot of separate strands. So this is just one such attempt to be knowing. And that is what the passage is about, a very beautiful passage. Let's begin with the questions to be able to see how well have we been able to understand the passage. Based on the passage, which one of the following statement is a valid argument about the emergence of music and musicking? So we know that the music has always been there. Maybe, until a recent past, that is maybe some 20,000 years, there is still some similarity. But then the further you go, there's going to be very dissimilar, activities of what musicking is all about. But there is always been music. Anyone who can perceive and experience music must be capable of music. No, that's not what it is. 20,000 years ago, human musical capacities were not very different from what they are today. Yes, makes sense. What we also wanted. All musical work is related in the overlap. Now, all is extreme, can't be my answer. Although musicking is not language-like, it shares the quality of being a form of expression. No, that's not the analogy that was being made. Now, it is a lot language-like, it is not a lot symbol-like is what it said. So this can't be an answer either, which means the correct answer is going to be option B. Let's get on to question number 10. Now beginning with, which one of the following statement, if true, would weaken the author's claim that humans are musicking creatures? So the author has gone about by saying that music has always been there. Music has been instrumental. It has always been a part and parcel, and we have all evolved through it, right? So whatever should be our answer has to go around it. Now, if I have to weaken the author's claim that humans are musicking creatures, I'm simply going to say that humans have not had that innate disposition for it. The fact that other things have influenced this. Because right now the passage said that humans have this innate, right? It's something that they are just born with, the instinct of music. Non-musical capacities are of far greater consequence to human survival than the capacity. Now, this is not even strengthening. I mean, it is nothing to weaken as well. This is out of scope altogether, not an answer. From a cognitive and psychological vantage, musicking arises from the unconscious disposition, not the conscious, so which means that humans are, of course, musicking creatures. So this is definitely weakening, but we can always, keep this to reserve, because we'll have to further see that maybe on the face of it looks like, but is it really? So we'll reserve this. Musical capacities are primarily socio-cultural, which explains the wide diversity of musical form. Okay, now when I say from a cognitive and psychological vantage, musicking arises from the unconscious disposition, not conscious ones. In fact, I slightly would want to go back 1 minute back to my words. I think I slipped a word here and there. Now this should not, this is actually strengthening the idea. It's not weakening. Why is it strengthening? Because when I say humans are musicking creatures, which means it is innate. If something that is unconscious is going to come to you naturally, which means it is innate. So this is strengthening. We want an answer which is going to weaken. This is not an answer. I hope everybody understands. I'm so sorry for that little slip that happened there. Musical capacities are primarily socio-cultural, which explains the wide diversity, which means it is not innate. It is something that is influenced by the culture, the society. This says that humans are not musicking creatures. It is forced upon, or it is tutored upon. Makes for an answer because this is weakening. As musicking is neither language-like or symbol-like, it is much older form of expression, something that actually goes to say that yes, humans are musicking creatures, because back when there was no language and no symbol, music even existed then. So this is definitely strengthening the idea, not my answer, which gets me to the correct answer being option C. Okay. Now, which one of the following is set of words are going to be the best keyword? So we are going to follow the rule of the protagonist and simply see which of the following do we want. We want humans, we want musicking, we want the humanity, how the transition has happened, we want symbol, and we want linguistic. Let's see. Musicking, cognitive psychology, antique. Okay, now I don't want antique. Symbol makers, if you want symbol makers, then you give me language makers also. Not an answer. Humans capacity, language, symbol. Okay, now this doesn't have musicking. I can't have this as an answer. Human, musicking, linguistic, symbol making, modern humanity, definitely. Human, psychological vantage, musicking. Okay, casserer is not so much. Emergence of music, no, not so much. So the correct answer is going to be option C. If you just bind these words together, stitch it together, you will actually have the main idea of the passage. And the last one for this passage that we have. Think beyond all the qualifications that might trail after this bold statement. Okay. Now, in the context of the passage, what is the author trying to communicate in this quoted text? So, the only thing that we understand that the author is clearly trying to be communicating in this is that although, of course, there are like a lot of stumbles, right? That is, there are a lot of things which might render the application of the statement wrong, but they all exist. They are true. Let's see. A bold statement is one that requires no qualification to infer its meaning, of course not. Although there are many caveats are obstructions and other considerations, the statement is essentially true. Yes, that is definitely what it is. Thinking beyond qualification allows us to give free rein to music. It's not about controlling the musical expression. A bold statement is one that is trailed by a series of qualifying clarifications and caveats. We're not clarifying essentially. If you see there's an ellipsis, which means you need to go back to the line until the first full stop. And it simply goes to say that think beyond all the qualifications that might trail after this bold. So the statement comes and then what are the qualifications that are going to be there? So it is that there are so many considerations, so many caveats, but in actuality, it is the truth. That is what is the ugly and the blatant truth. So the correct idea becomes option B. I hope this one was absolutely clear. And with that, let's move on to the last passage. Because after the passage comes the fun part, which is all about the verbal ability. 13 to 16. We begin with the emergence of the philosophy of the social science as an arena of thought and as a set of social institutions. The two characterizations overlap but are not congruent. Congruent means similar. Academic disciplines are social institutions. My view is that institutions are all those social entities that organize actions. They link acting individuals into social structures. So that's what essentially institutes do. They try to link. There are various kinds of institutions. Hegelians and Marxists emphasize universal institutions such as family, ritual, governance, economy, and military. These are mostly institutions that just grew. Perhaps in some imaginary beginning of time, they spontaneously appeared. So they just popped up. In their present incarnations, incarnation means, another birth. However, they are very much a product of the conscious attempt to mold and plan them. But if you see in recent times, it's a product of consciousness. We have family, law, established and disestablished churches, constitution and laws, including those governing the economy and the military. There are laws. Institutions deriving from statutes like joint stock companies are formal by contrast with informal ones such as friendship. So they're both formal institutes and informal ones. There are some institutions that come in both formal and informal variants, as the one in mixed ones. And then there are mixed as well. Consider the fact that a stock exchange and a black market are both market institutions, one formal, one not. Consider further that there are many features of the work of the stock exchange that rely on informal, non-codifiable agreements, not least the language used for communication. To be precise, mixtures are a norm. From constitutions at the top to bylaws near the bottom, we are always adding to or tinkering with earlier institutions. The grown and the designed are intertwined. So institutions are of all sorts. There is variety, and that there is always, a law that subsets it, and there is always a constitution which is on top of it. So that is what it says. Moving further, it is usual in social thought to create culture and tradition as different form, although alongside institution. And then it says it's very usual, to have a social thought alongside it. The view taken here is different. Culture and tradition are subsets of institutions, analytically isolated for explanatory and expository purposes. Expository means descriptive, something that is explained thoroughly. So they go about by saying that culture and traditions are actually subsets of an institution. Some social scientists have taken all institutions, even purely local ones, to be entities that satisfy basic human needs under local conditions. Others differed and declared any structure of reciprocal roles and norms as institutions. Most of these differences are differences on emphasis rather than disagreement. So it's about, what is the kind of preaching, what is the kind of message that they give, and it's not really about the disagreement. Let us straddle all these versions and present institutions very gently. So let's see what is the general conception of institution. As structures, they serve to coordinate the actions of individuals. Institutions themselves then have no aim or purpose other than those given to them by actors or used by actors to explain them. So there is no purpose unless there is somebody who is enforcing the reason as to why the institution is there. Language is a formative institution of social life and for science. Both formal and informal languages involved, naturally grown or designed. Language is all of these into varying degrees. Languages are paradigms of institutions or, from another perspective, nested sets of institutions. Syntax, semantics, lexicons, and alphabet character set are all institutions within the larger institutional framework of a written language. So these are all nothing but subsets to a larger framework of language. Natural language are typical examples of what Ferguson called the result of human action, but not the execution of any human design. So they are nothing but a result of human action, they're not an execution. Reformed natural languages and artificial languages introduce design into their modifications or refinement of natural language. Above all, languages are paradigms of institutional tools that function to coordinate. So it's about how language can actually be an institutional tool that function to coordinate so that there is more coordination that is being maintained. So CAT always does this. Out of the 4 passages, there will always be this one passage which will have a very very societal aspect to it and easy to understand. Of course, our passage being this one. Unfortunately, it was the last, but then not the least, of course. Let's get on to question number 13. Which of the following best represents the essence of the passage? So this is the main idea question. We have to find the one which is going to be talking about what the passage is all about. So the passage is talking about institutions, how these are basically the kind of structures that are not, they're basically subsets that are made by people to be able to manage. So language is the fund now. The passage was not about language, just the last paragraph was about language. We can chuck this option here. It is usual in social thought to create culture and tradition as different from no. They are a subset of it, they are not different. Wrong. Institutions are structures to serve that serve to coordinate the actions of an individual. Yes, it is all done to be able to tutor the human conduct. Very much. Stock exchange was never the protagonist. There is only one answer, the easiest of the lot. The answer will have to be option 3. On to question number 14. Consider the fact that the stock exchange and the black market are both market institutions, one formal, one not. Which of the following statement best explains this quote in the context of the passage? Let's see. The stock exchange and the black market are examples of how, even within the same domain, different kinds of institutions can coexist. Perfect. I think this is the best way to be able to have an explanation for this. Let's keep this. Market instruments can be formally traded. Okay, there's no trading. Just remove it. The moment you get a red flag as of a word which itches you, just remove it right there because there can be no explanation for it. The stock exchange and the black market are both organized two functions. They're not both of the same type. There's no similarity that has to be drawn. The stock exchange and the black market are both dependent on the market again. No outside information, not about the, it's just fictional. So we will stick to what has been talked about. There was only one answer, which is likely to be, like I said, CAT will always give you this one passage which is just going to be so easy. And thankfully, this happens to be just the one that we have. 15th. In the first paragraph of the passage, what are the two characterizations that are seen as overlapping but not congruent? So what are the two things which are not similar? They're not congruent, but then they're overlapping. So if you go back to the first paragraph, the philosophy of social science and the set, no. Arena of thought in academic disciplines and institution, this is a specific detailed question. Individuals in social structure, not at all. This was specifically mentioned. So I think there is no budging and there's no description that is required as to why this answer is going to be option C. And the last one, yay! So we can finally finish up with this and then move on to, like I said, the fun part of the paper always. All of the following inferences in the passage are false except, which means give me the one which is now going to be true. Natural language refers to that stage of language development where no conscious human intent is evident in the formation of language. Yes. It says all the following from the passage are false except. So what is the one thing that is true? Definitely this is true. The institution of friendship cannot be found in the institution of joint companies. No, it's not that. Let's remove it right here. Institutions like family, ritual, governance, economy, and military are natural and cannot be consciously, though they can be consciously modified. As concept, culture, and tradition have no analytical, explanatory, or expository. Okay, no is explicit. That's not what it is. So I think either elimination se aa jata. This is pretty clear. Our answer will have to be option A. And with that, we come to an end to the reading comprehensions. I hope all of the passages, the options, and the questions, well, most importantly, have been absolutely clear to you guys. And with that, let's move on to the next bit of questions that we have, which are around the verbal ability. All right, guys, beginning with the next bit, the interesting stuff starts now. We now have a parajumble. First things first, we're going to read all of the statements, find an opener for us, and find the mandatory pairs. And let's begin. From chemical pollutants in the environment to the damming of rivers to invasive species transported through global trade and travel, every environmental issue is different, and there is no single tech solution that can solve this crisis. So there has to be a crisis. We know that we cannot begin with one because there is no crisis that we have as yet. Discourse on the threat of environmental collapse revolves around cutting down emissions, but biodiversity loss and ecosystem collapse are caused by myriad and diverse reasons. Okay, looks like an opener for us. Let's reserve this. This would require legislation that recognizes, so this looks like a course correction, right? That recognizes the rights of future generation and other species that allow the judiciary to uphold a much higher standard of environmental protection than currently possible. Clearly, our environmental crises require larger political solutions. So I know for a fact that 4 and 3 is definitely a mandatory pair because it talks about the fact that there has to be intervention of the political solutions and not just minor technological ones. So instead of focusing, and now that this says there can be no, I mean, there is no technological, there's no one short technological, which means right before this can be one, and then we have the opener to be two, because one ends on saying there is no single tech solution. Continuing on that, there is no technological solution that will help, but rather a political solution, and this be the course correction. So I think it was very easy. Our series was going to be 2, 1, 4, and 3. So this was clearly a very fun one. And with that, let's move on to the 18th. Now, there is a sentence. Most were first-time users of a tablet and a digital app. Okay. Now, एक Badhians or Aage Badhians USP lies in the ethnographic research that constituted the foundation of its development process. Customization based on learning directly from potential users were critical to making this self-paced app suitable for both literate and non-literate audience. Now, most were first time. No, we're still talking about how the app is, so nothing is going to fit here. A is not going to be our answer. The digital interface caters to a Hindi-speaking audience who have minimal to no experience with digital services and devices. Dash, now when I say most were first time, no, we've still not gone to people, we're still talking about the content of the app or how the app was. So the content and the functionality of the app are suitable for the wide audience. This includes youth preparing for an independent role in life or a study ready to create a strong foundation of financial management early in her life. Dash household members. This is continuing on how it can also be helping them altogether. So clearly I know that blank 3 is also not going to be, which means household members desirous of improving their family's financial strength to reach their aspirations can also benefit. We piloted AG Bidens in early 20th for over 400 students from rural areas, most of them, the fourth one coming here. Most of them were. So why? Because the moment you talk about a pilot project, that is a trial that happened, and most of them were first time users of tablet and digital app. Now this sinks in the best, the correct answer being option D. Let's get on to the next. Okay. Now what we have is a summary. So we are going to read the paragraph and we are going to see which of the following is going to be the best summary for it. Several of the world's earliest cities were organized along egalitarian lines. Egalitarian is equal, equalitarian. In some regions, urban populations governed themselves for centuries without any indication of the temples and palaces that would later emerge. In other places, temples and palaces never emerged at all. And there is simply no evidence of a class of administrators or any other sort of ruling stratum. It would seem that the mere fact of the urban life does not necessarily imply any particular form of political organization and never did. Far from resigning us to inequality, the picture that is now emerging of humanity's past may open our eyes to egalitarian possibilities we otherwise would have never considered. So it's like if you go back to the earlier cities, you're going to say that there was no strata. There was absolutely no evidence of a class of administrators or anything of that sort. It's something that did not even happen back then, something that we might not think happens anymore in today's times. The lack of hierarchical administration in the ancient cities can be deduced by the absence of religious and regal structures such as, no, that's not what it is. The passage is about how there was an egalitarian society. Everybody was treated equally. So this doesn't have that tone. Contrary to our assumption that urban settlements have always involved hierarchical, political, and administrative structures, ancient cities were not organized. No, that's not what it is. Just not about the political and the administrative. It's just about the fact that there was a sense of egalitarianism. The protagonist, which is not mentioned in B at all. The emergence of a class of administrators and ruling stratum transformed the egalitarian urban life of ancient cities to the hierarchical civic organization of today. Again, not, which means, of course, the only answer that we have will have to be D. We now have the evidence in support of the existence of an egalitarian urban life in some ancient cities where political and civic organizations are far less hierarchical. Takes everything into account, and that is what is going to be the answer for us. Okay, let's get on to the 20th one and see what do we have over here. There's a common idea that museums' artworks are somehow timeless objects available to admire for generations to come. But many are objects of decay. Even the most venerable old master paintings don't escape. Pigments discolor, varnishes crack, canvases warp. This challenging fact of art world life is down to something that's more like a thread from a morality tale, inherent vice. Damien Hirst's iconic shark floating in a tank entitled The Physical Impossibility of Death in the Mind of Someone Living is a work that puts on spotlight on inherent vice. When he made it in 91, Hirst got himself in a pickle by not using the right kind of pickle to preserve the giant fish. The result was that the shack began to decompose quite quickly, its preserving liquid clouding, the skin wrinkling, and the unpleasant smell wafting from the tank. So it's basically trying to be talking about, the inherent vice which is there with art, and that one can't really do anything about it, and that is what actually becomes the sad part of the art altogether. Now, let's see. Again, please understand, guys, anything that is ever used as an example in summary is never going to be in the summary. So we don't want to have Damien Hirst's iconic shark. We just want to have the essence of it. Museums have to guard timeless art. Okay, it's not about guarding. Let's remove this there. The role of the museums have evolved to ensure that the artworks are preserved forever. Now, that's not what is happening. So, that's not the answer. Artworks may not last forever, they may deteriorate with time, and the challenge is to slow down the degeneration. Yes. Museums are left with the moral responsibility of restoring and preserving the artwork since artists cannot, it's not about artists not preserving, it's about the fact that it is going to happen. It's an inevitable. It's just that you have to be careful about how to slow down the process. So the correct answer over here is going to be option C. Okay. Once again, getting on to a summary type question here. On to question number 21. Today, many of the debates about behavioral control in the age of big data echo Cold War era anxieties about brainwashing, insidious manipulation, and recession in the technological society. In his book, Psychopolitics, Hahn warns of the sophisticated use of the targeted online content, enabling influence to take place on a pre-reflexive level. On our current trajectory, freedom will prove to have been merely an interlude. The fear is that the digital age has not liberated us but exposed us by offering up our private lives to machine learning algorithms that can process masses of personal and behavioral data. In the world of influencers and digital entrepreneurs, it's not easy to imagine the resurgence of a cultural engendered through disconnect and disaffiliation, but concerns over the threat of online targeting, polarization, and big data have inspired recent polemics about the need to rediscover solitude and disconnect. So, of course, the passage is trying to be talking about though there is so much of data that is available, now the debate comes as to what is the kind of freedom one has over the data and the requirement for privacy. The notion of freedom and privacy is at stake in a world where artificial intelligence is capable of influencing behavior through data gathered online. Okay, well, this might make sense, so let's reserve it. Because it's a summary, we'll have to see if we find something which is more convincing. The role of technology in influencing public behavior is reminiscent of a manner in which behaviors are manipulated. No, that's not what it is. With big data making personal information freely available, the debate on the nature of freedom and the nature of privacy has resurfaced. Well, between A and C, I know C is a better choice because it's just not about the notion of these terminologies and the artificial intelligence. It's about the fact that it's now publicly available, which is where, the question of the freedom and privacy so has resurfaced. To what extent is what? So, of course, C is a better choice here. Rather than freeing us, digital technologies enslaving us by collecting, it's just not about that. Although privacy is an important aspect, but it's also about, the kind of freedom that one has. So this will not be an answer. Once again, our answer is going to be option C. 22, we are again going to see where is the best fit of the statement going to be. This was years in the making, but fast tracked during the pandemic when people started being more mindful about their foo explained. Okay. For millennia, Ghee has been a venerated staple for the subcontinental diet, but it fell out of favor a few decades ago when saturated fats were largely considered to be unhealthy. Okay. Now, of course, till now we don't have any introduction of, why the fast track during the pandemic. That's not what has happened. No idea of the pandemic also, so one will not be an answer. But more recently, as the thinking around saturated fat is shifting globally, Indians are finding their own way back to the ingredient that is so integral to their cuisine. Okay, now again, till now, we've not had any idea of anything which is now going to be, something which is anything which is helping us understand that this was years in the making, but fast tracked during the pandemic when people started being more mindful. So we've still not talked about anything being mindful. So not the idea. From Karmakar, a renewed interest in ghee is emblematic of a return of the basic movements in India. Okay. Now, this was years in the making, but fast tracked during the pandemic when people started being more. Now has what has happened is the idea of ghee has of course come back. There has been emblematic return of the basic movements in India. Well, yes, this can be something where now they're being mindful about their all of these, all of the ghee that is being talked about, that is being explained. Now let's read further. 3 seems to be a plot for us. This movement is also part of the overall trend towards slow food. Okay. Now, in keeping this movement's philosophy, ghee can be produced locally, even at homes, and has inextricable cultural ties. Dash at the basic level, ghee is a type of clarified butter. So clearly, 4 is not where it is going to be. We simply have to talk about the mindful aspect, and the only place where the mindful aspect fits in is going to be statement 3. So just pick that one undertone and see where exactly is that undertone going to fit. Okay. Question number 23, a parajumble. We'll read all of the sentences to be able to know which of the following should be the correct sequence. Women may prioritize cooking because they feel they alone are responsible for mediating a toxic and unhealthy food system. Food is commonly framed through the lens of individual choice. You can choose to eat healthily. This is particularly so in a neoliberal context where the state has transferred the responsibility of food onto individual consumers. The individualized framing of choice appeals to a popular desire to experience agency, but draws away the structural obstacles that stratify individual food choices. I think the one thing that we will all agree with hands down is that the opener will have to be statement 2. So food is commonly framed through the lens of the individual choice, and you can choose to eat healthily. But the moment you talk about the fact that it's upon the person, as to how is it that they wish and what is it that they want to eat. So let's further talk about the individual because you are choosing. So the next line will be the individualized framing of choice appeals to a popular desire to experience agency but draws away the structural obstacle that stratify individual food choices. So clearly the next is going to be 4, which becomes option D. Now, once you talk about how it is, it draws away from the structural obstacle of being able to stratify it, the next should be why is the stratification happening? So this is particularly so in the neoliberal context where the state has transformed the responsibility of food onto individual customers, and the customers being women may prioritize cooking, but they feel alone responsible for mediating. So they are the ones who feel that it's their job to make sure that there's no unhealthy food that is getting into the system. So the correct sequence becomes 2, 4, 3, and 1. So you see, we just took lead from the words and found the series for ourselves. And the last one. The trajectory of cheerfulness through the self is linked to the history of the word cheer, which comes from an old French meaning face. Translation of the Bible into vernacular languages expanded the noun cheer into a more abstract cheerfulness, something that circulates as an emotional and social quality defining the self or a moral community. When you take on a cheerful expression, no matter what state of your soul, your cheerfulness moves into the self. The interior of the self is changed by the power of cheer. People in the medieval Canterbury Tale have a piteous or a sober cheer. Cheer is an expression and a body part lying at the intersection of emotion and physiognomy. So first things first, we have to find an opener for us. So of the lot, we know that we can begin with a 3. So it says when you take on a cheerful expression, no matter what state of your soul, your cheerfulness moves into the self. The interior of the self is changed by the power of cheer. So there is some sort of change, that can be done. So how is it that it can be a change? So let's talk about what is going to be the change. The change has then been further talked because the interior self is changed by the power of cheer. So this change idea is further denoted by the trajectory. Trajectory is also the path. So that can also enhance the change. So the trajectory of cheerfulness through the self is linked in the history of the word cheer that comes. Now that we've understood what the history of the word is likely to be, of course, the next idea is going to be as to how people in the medieval times talked about it, because once you start to talk about something, everything has to talk in assistance. So the next will have to be 4. In the Canterbury Tale, have a piteous or sober cheer. Cheer is an expression, a body part lying at the intersection of emotion and physiognomy. And ultimately, translations of the Bible into vernacular languages expanded the noun cheer into a more abstract cheerfulness, something that circulates as an emotional and social quality defining the self and moral community. So the correct sequence that we have is 3, 1, 4, and 2. And with that, we come to an end to the mock analysis. I mean, the CAT analysis. I hope everything has been absolutely clear. Thank you for spending your valuable time going through the analysis. I hope I've been able to do a decent job with all of the requirements that have suited to your, comfort and discomfort both. If there's anything that you feel still could have been clarified better or something that you're still confused with, please feel free to write to me on my Telegram ID, Suyukti_Sate, and it shall be my privilege and I should be very glad to be able to help you with the confusion that you have. And with that, it is a wrap. I'm going to see you guys very soon with slot 3. Until then, a good idea is going to be that you solve it first before you have a look at the analysis altogether. Have a great day, everybody. Thank you so much. Looking forward to seeing all of you again.